M. Davidson. I live in Newport Beach, California. I'll be 87 this December. And to give you a brief rundown, when I was 15 years old, I ran away from home and joined the Canadian Army. We were set to go overseas, and I notified my mother. She notified the Canadian government, and they threw me out. And then Pearl Harbor came along, December 7th. I was still 15, but 4 days later I turned 16 and decided they couldn't fight a war without me. In March 19, 1942, I enlisted in the United States Army. I'd kind of fudged about my age. And various stations up until 1943, I was sent to the desert and joined the 104th Infantry. I'd been with other units before. At the 104th Infantry, we came to Camp Carson, finally overseas. And we fought through northern France, Belgium, Holland with the English, came to the Americans probably late October, November 44. And I had my 19th birthday in Germany. We fought. We were supposed to be relieved at one time at Cologne in March. But they took the bridge at Remagen and everybody went over. And we kept fighting. But now it was like it was going to be over any day. And so, we were a little more lax. And then comes to Easter Sunday, 1945. It was also April Fool's Day. And they were having a little mass, which is a Catholic thing. And not being of that faith, they kind of suggested I take a patrol out. So I took a tank from the 750th, that was our attached armor, and got on back of the tank and made a big sweeping bow with my helmet. And away we went. And about 400 or 500 clicks down, Panzerfaust hit the tank. That's a German anti-tank rocket. The tank commander, gunner, assistant gunner killed instantly. The driver and the assistant driver got out of their escape hatches. I was blown off the tank, but I came up shooting. The two tankers got into this building, and I got a few people in front of me, and then I got into the building. And I got myself in a position where they couldn't get at me from the back. And these little houses then were a little house, and then there's a little barn attached to it. And I was sitting in one of the little stalls. And the Germans couldn't get to me, and I could pick them off so easily. I had lots of ammunition or an M1 rifle. And I figured if I could hold out a little bit, the outfit that had been celebrating Mass, which is a regiment, would come get me. And I'm shooting away, and I'm just a happy little bugger. Actually, I was scared to death. And they couldn't get to me, because every time they tried to rush me, it was easy to pick them off. So suddenly grenades start coming in. And at first, I was able to grab these potato mashers because they have handles. And I was throwing them back. And still I figured the guys would come get me. Well, the Germans got sneaky for some reason. They must have held these grenades and then threw them, because I reached for them, they exploded. The next thing I knew, I came to, myself, the two tankers, were guests of the Nazi government, POWs. From then on, it was a difficult thing when you're being interrogated with a gun in your head. You have a tendency to want to tell them everything, but name, rank, and serial number was really all I knew. And they weren't very happy with me or with the other two. And they marched us for a while until we tried to escape. Then they captured us, and they finally sent us to a place, as I recall, it was called Northeim. And it wasn't a big camp. It was just mainly for guys who, I guess, the Germans didn't like too much. So one of the guards had fought in the Russian front, in the Africa Corps. He'd fought everywhere. He'd been wounded about 5 or 6 times, and we thought he was an old man who was probably 30, 35. And I got talking to him, and I said, you know, if you let us out, I'll get you home. And he had a kid, 5 years old, he'd never seen. And the Allies had captured his village, and of course, the Germans always told them once the Yanks came in, they raped and murdered everyone. Well, he believed it. So he told them, get us out, and we'll get you home. And he did, finally. And there were 7 of us got away together. And we went out in the forest. The weather was miserable. You couldn't, the clouds. So we got to the forest, and turned out we were going the wrong way, deeper into Germany. Of course, we didn't know that at the time. Somehow or another, certain things become a blessing. After the Bulge, they used to give us new passwords every 24 hours. Well, we didn't have any passwords, so getting through the German lines into the American lines would have been difficult. Of course, we didn't think of it at the time. And we wandered on, and finally we were desperate. And we suddenly had to get out of the forest. We had to eat, we had to do something. And all of a sudden we hear armor, tanks. And I figured, oh God, here it goes again. And one of the tankers said, hey, they're American. And I says, how the hell do you know? Not looking. He says, German tanks squeak. American tanks are lubricate or something. And sure enough, it was the 2nd Armored Division making a sweep from the north. Patton would have been coming up from the south. We don't know that. Anyway, they first fired on us, but luckily no one was hit. And they took us in, took us back to headquarters. The general was glad to see us. We were some of the earliest escapees, I guess. And he fed us, and we immediately regurgitated all over his headquarters. And anyway, he said he was going to bring a plane in to fly us out. And I wanted to know what he was going to do with my German. And he said, well, we couldn't take him with us, but he promised he'd get him home. I have no idea if he did or not. They brought a C-47 in. How they landed it, I don't know. They didn't cut the engines. They threw us aboard to Le Havre, Camp Lucky Strike. Once at Camp Lucky Strike, they stripped us, DDT'd us, scrubbed us, gave us uniforms, shaved my head, took care of some of the holes up there, some of the holes in the shoulder, then put us on a hospital ship. That would have been the 3rd of May, 1945. We went across, we stopped at Southampton, picked up some more wounded. And 4 or 5 days later, the war ended, we were mid-Atlantic. And by the 15th of May, we were back in the States. Now, my 2 guys that were with me lived on the eastern part of the States. So they went to Miami, and all of those on the western part of the States went to Santa Barbara, where we were talked about. They were treated, psychiatrists, all this sort of stuff. I was there for about 3-4 weeks, I think, hospitalized a bit. And I never heard of the 104th Infantry. Prisoners, ex-prisoners, no longer have a unit. You're called a RAMP, Repatriated Allied Military Personnel. So at any rate, finally, I was discharged from service after some hospitalizations. And I went about my life. My little brother, who was a Marine, read about the 104th having a reunion in San Francisco. That was in 1986, 40 years later. And I rushed up there. I've made every reunion since. Now, as to the other two men who escaped with me, one we never heard of. One, John Alfiero, spent 40 years looking for me, found me, and we're in touch. He's 89 years old now, lives in Troy, Ohio. I think he's in very serious health at the moment. I talked to him just yesterday. And together, we do have some interesting stories. After this, it was a, the usual thing. Takes you a few years to get acclimatized to the world. And then, of course, you've got to go to work. You've got to make a place for yourself in the world. And you do the best you can. Young gentlemen, young ladies in school, one important thing. Above all, to thyself be true, and for God's sakes, God bless America.